Kierkegaard and Nietzsche. Hello everyone, this is Ken Witt from the ThePixelPosseTeam, and this is another Friday Night Zen. Tonight's Friday Night Zen is going to be a little different in that I don't ask questions. I'm merely going to discuss something that I've been working on, I've been interested in recently. In my philosophy of religion class, which is what I'm taking currently, I just took my midterm, and one of the essays that I had to write was discussing the philosophies of Kierkegaard versus the philosophies of Nietzsche. Both are very interesting, and the main difference, to be a quick sum up, would be Kierkegaard is a theistic existentialist, so he's an existentialist with the belief in God, while Nietzsche is an atheistic existentialist, which is existentialism without the belief in God. In particular, they both have very interesting approaches to the situation, and the main question that they ask is, how do we live a meaningful life in a supposedly meaningless world? And they both answer it two different ways. That I will discuss today. I'm going to begin with Kierkegaard's ideas, and the one that is in particular is he had 3 stages that a man can go through. And when I say man, I mean human, but it's easier to say and sounds a bit, philosophical. Now, the first one is the aesthetic stage. That's the stage that's basically hedonism and, selfish and is about abandon. And in this stage, the man equates pleasure with happiness. And Kierkegaard said this was the falsity of the stage, because in the end, this stage does not ultimately make you happy. It's a stage that will, in the end, lead to despair. He said, after a man overcomes the aesthetic stage, they enter into the ethical stage. The ethical stage is composed of the differences between right and wrong, and understanding it's essentially the tragic hero complex when one goes through the ethical stage. You give up all the unnecessities of life and you just become a man, essentially. These two stages are what he calls the synthesis and the antithesis stage, and that they both combine to reach the synthesis. And the synthesis to him would be if one were to combined, the aesthetic and the ethical stage becomes the religious stage, which is the final stage that he claimed was in the end. The religious stage is composed of submission to God. Kierkegaard is the theistic existentialist, by the way. And by giving up oneself and giving up the sin of what is considered mass man, which I'll touch up on later. But in particular, he wanted to point out that one reaches meaning by seeking God and succumbing to God's will and accepting responsibility for your own sins and not being institutionalized. Sorry for the lack of eloquence just there. I was tripping over my words. Next, I'm going to discuss the 2 principles of Ubermensch, which is Nietzsche's philosophy and his idea of what makes the Superman. In his idea, you have to combine the principle of Apollo, he uses a bit of Greek allusion, and the principle of Dionysus. The principle of Apollo is one of reason, one of serenity and clarity, one of leadership and power. The principle of Dionysus is one of lust, eroticism, hedonism, courage, abandon, doing as one wishes, essentially. Apollo would be the dichotomy difference between Dionysus' philosophy. Now, his idea is that you have to combine these two in a balance to achieve Ubermensch, which is German for Superman. And upon doing that, you will find meaning in the so-called meaningless world. The next point I want to discuss was what Kierkegaard called the sin of mass man, in that one shouldn't prescribe to organizations or churches, but should instead seek God and one's meaning on your own without the assistance of such, manipulative organizations as a church. This I somewhat agree with, but in particular I had difficulty in understanding the combination between his particular philosophies of the three stages and the sin of mass man. I'll get to criticizing him in a bit. Next I want to talk about Nietzsche's need for power. I agreed with him for the most part, up until he started discussing that power is the necessity in one's meaning for life, and there are two complexes that he said people have: the master complex and the slave complex. The master complex is basically without abandon, only self-concerned, and that being compassionate to others and worrying about others is the idea of the slave complex, and that God, in his opinion, is nothing but a tool for control, which I must say I somewhat agree with, though I disagree with his utmost necessity for achieving power instead of being a compassionate, loving being, which is something that I would say is very important when seeking meaning in my life. Now, if I had to choose between the two, of which I prefer Nietzsche. And that I prefer his idea of seeking balance between the principle of Apollo and the principle of Dionysus, and that it's very internal, and it doesn't seek external things that Kierkegaard seeked, in that Kierkegaard said that to go from the ethical stage and to move to the religious stage, it required a leap of faith, which I disagree with, in that one should not have to go on leaps of faith in seeking meaning, and complete submission to God, which I also disagree with, in that is not responsible, which is what he's claiming. Both of them had claimed that the world is meaningless, and that you have to seek a meaningful life regardless of the meaningless of the world and the universe. And in my opinion, taking a leap of faith or relying on God to seek your meaning is relying too much on the so-called meaningless world. Nietzsche I prefer because he internalizes the issue in trying to adopt different traits in what seeks out the Ubermensch. Nietzsche's philosophy is a bit more self-help, while Kierkegaard leads more onto too much of a religious and preachy kind of nonsense. But both are very important. I highly recommend everyone listening to check out and do some reading of Nietzsche and Kierkegaard. Both of them are very valuable. And I'll end with a quote from Kierkegaard. He said that a man who serves the true God with only half a heart serves an idol, and the man that serves an idol with all of his heart serves the true God. Thank you for listening to the Friday Night Zen. This is Ken Witt from the Pixel Posse team. I hope everyone has a nice day.